Hi and welcome back to the channel. Go ahead and smash the like and subscribe buttons for me if you've ever shared a hotel room with a friend so you could attend a scale model show. You ended up spooning in the same bed because birds got into the room and crapped in your mate's bed, and yet it didn't feel weird. So this will be part 5 in the build series on the E-60 paper Panzer. I'll be doing the oil paint rendering to finish off the weathering on this kit, and then a few tidy up items. So let's get into it and get this finished. Here's where we left the build previously. Painting and dry pigments complete. So let's get into the oil paint rendering to finish off the weathering. Something we need to keep top of mind is making sure earth tones are consistent over the upper half and are sympathetic or match the dry pigment weathering we've already completed on the lower hull and suspension. To do that, we will select oil paints that match the tones already used, plus a contrast colour. More on that contrast colour to come. The effect I'm going to work towards is a dusty tank in summer, with a few light mud splashes kicked up after summer rains in the previous day. To do that, I need a matte surface, so the oils bind in a very specific way to the paint, and the fact I'm using oils means the paint surface is not under any risk of damage in this process. First step is to apply some odourless thinner to condition the paint surface. First thing the keen of eye is going to notice is that I haven't used a clear coat or varnish. What may surprise you even more is I won't use one at all. So after applying the initial oils down as a dust liner around an object, blending out the oil is key to weathering open spaces. You can see here that using an old angled blender, I'm blending the oil into the surface. It's a scruffy method of integrating layered dust and wear into the paint. It's important to consistently check your references and look at how the crew access a vehicle. Where would mud spray up on the vehicle? Where would the vehicle be worn? And that's going to give you the fundamental positioning for where you lay out those dust effects. So let's talk about what oil paint rendering is. So it's effectively the overpainting of the model surface using oil paints to add age and weathering. I find it to be a superior process to traditional enamel washes and filters, and here's why. Firstly, oil paints are scalable in their opacity, from fully translucent to 100% colour. That means as modelers we have full control over the depth of colour we're using. 2. Oil paints have a slow drying time, which makes them perfect for long work times and blending. 3. The results are easily repeatable through the use of correct techniques. 4. Oils are easily blended, which means with just a handful of colours we can create a rainbow of options from subtle to bold colour choices. Again, the power that this gives us is incredible. If you want to know more about oil paint rendering or the OPR process, I'll leave a link in the description to Michael Rinaldi's live videos on OPR. He's a great teacher and he probably explains this process in a great deal more depth than I'm going to in this video, so I certainly suggest popping over there and having a look at his teaching. So let's have a look at the fundamentals of oil paint rendering. We need to spread oil paints onto a cardboard surface to remove the linseed oil that's inside the oil paint. And what this will do is it'll allow us to get a matte finish with the oils. Apply the oils in a light to dark order. It's very difficult to apply light colours over dark colours once they've been put down. Use sharp pointed brushes to keep total control over both the application and blending process. This really is a 2-brush system. Whilst I use odourless thinner to work the oil, I'm using a brush that is nearly dry. So I'm only using enough thinner on the brush to work the oils and manipulate them. The key to OPR is working in layers. Whilst we need to put down enough oil to work with, don't try and do this in a single application. Remember, work light to dark and don't try and get this in one hit out of the gate. It just isn't possible. Okay, so let's talk about pin washers. I know this is an important subject for many of you, so let's tackle where they fit into my style. It's true that pin washers make pieces on your model pop. However, I feel it's become increasingly popular in the hobby for AFV modelers to use a black or very dark pin wash over the surface of virtually the entire model. I think it's a vastly overdone technique. Using too much or too dark a pin wash makes the vehicle look a little bit, well, cartoonish. Like all techniques, pin washes need to be used more selectively to highlight specific parts. In my weathering process, I do pin washes using oil paints. I rarely use black or very dark colours, and if I do, it's for a very specific purpose. Instead, I'll use oils for dry brushing or distressing the paint over the edge of panels when using dark colours. This is going to make a bit more sense further in the video as I do the dust effects and the subtle highlights. Remember, one of the principles to OPR is using light to dark, so that dark dry brushing to scrub up the paint is done towards the end of the weathering process. Once I've completed the turret top plate, I move to the side plates. Being vertical surfaces, we need to use a different application here. I still apply the oils like before, but now I have to consider how on a vertical surface, dust and dirt will wash down the plate as rain or heavy dew contacts those surfaces. So in this instance, I'll use a wide, flat bristled brush with a hint of thinner and drag the oils down the plate. The oil paint rendering weathering process complete on the turret, I'll now start to add the additional stowage items. Common in late war German tanks is the addition of wire wrapped around the turret to be used to hold foliage as camouflage. I've given this light gauge wire some burnishing in AK's burnishing fluid just to knock down the shine a little. Then I wrap it around the track stowage hooks to create the look I'm after, and then on with the spare tracks. To affix the spare tracks, I'm using VMS CA glue for photo etch parts. It's a flexible glue with near instant bonding properties and it's perfect for this type of application. Finally, I move back to the top of the turret for some additional layers of weathering. The next step is adding an additional layer of dust. Remember earlier I mentioned a contrast colour? Well, here is where I'm going to use it to do two important things. Firstly, add variation to the first dust layer, which removes its current monotone appearance, and then I will sympathetically move the dust tones towards the Dunkelgelb used in the octopus camouflage. This visually ties the weathering together without the need for dramatic dark pin washes. This is a signature stylistic look for my models, where I aim to present realistic dust and mud effects and not push the model's appearance towards a more artistic impression. Adding this wet muddy water, which is highly diluted brown oil paint, will leave a muddy stain on the top surface of the turret. It is then up to the viewer how they interpret this. It could, for instance, be discarded coffee or simply dried mud after rain. It's their choice. I like to add quirky little objects or stains on a model that not only add to the story but will draw the eye of the viewer. Remember, part of this process is working in layers. So here I speckle on some semi-transparent oils in colours I've been using on the hull. Mud and speckly dirt is not restricted to the lower surfaces. And the last step is dry brushing some dark oil over the worn surfaces. This vastly improves the aged look by subtly wearing in additional age. Remember earlier when I said I'd address pin washes as one of the last effects? Well, this isn't a pin wash, but it will do the same thing by adding the contrast that we need, yet at the same time subtly improve the chipping and burnished paint effects. So now we've got to the point where we have fully weathered the turret. It has all the paint, chipping, dust, mud and burnished paint effects. It tells a story, and now I can use this as the basis to weather the remainder of the model. For me, this is such a key moment. The work I've done has set up a roadmap to complete the model. Rather than do each effect over the entire model at a single time, this way I test everything out on the turret. Once I'm happy, I'll then do it section by section on the remainder of the vehicle. Okay, so let's paint some stowage. I really love metal coloured dark iron. It's the perfect paint for weapons as it has a natural metal sheen to it. It can also be burnished, as you'll see shortly. I brush apply the dark iron, being careful not to paint other surfaces like the sling, which is made from Tamiya masking tape. If I accidentally paint another surface, it will be visible long after I've painted over it. The Panzer Aces acrylic leather belt colour is used to paint the STG-44's sling. Now the metal colour paint has dried, I can use a stiff bristled brush to burnish the paint. The longer you work it, the brighter it will become. With this technique, you only need to glide the brush over the surface, using the sides of the bristles. This really highlights the raised edges, which adds to the realistic look. Then I place the Sturmgewehr next to the cupola as a personal weapon for one of the crew. Look, I'm not a figure painter, I don't pretend to be a figure painter, but I did paint these two resin figures. They just make those of us who are average painters look a little better than we really are. I also added the headset wires using lead wire and painted them using Vallejo's model colour acrylic in Cavalry Brown. It may not be totally accurate, but I'm happy with how it presents for the viewer. And here we put Hans in his cupola and glue him in place, again using VMS CA glue. You'll see I also added a map, which coincidentally happens to be from the Kessel region in Germany. A quick pass of a graphite pencil highlights the crew-worn areas and really adds a touch of detail that this Panzer needed. Okay, so we're getting closer to the finish line now. Back to the lower hull, and I'm using a dark brown oil to add grease stains around the hubs and some of the road wheels. An asymmetrical approach here is best. Done in a controlled and limited way, don't make both sides match or it's just going to look unnatural. I want some oily stains on the rear deck near the engine. I mean, look, it's not really an AFV model, is it, without oily stains on the engine deck? And with this final touch, we've come to the end of this build. This has been my first paper Panzer build. It's been a long-term interest for me, ever since I saw Adam Wilder's E-50 and Michael Rinaldi's E-100 builds over a decade ago. The idea that we have planned tanks that were on paper and were only months away from prototype in 1945 means we have such a wide scope for our imagination when it comes to doing these builds. My aim here was to take elements from real life, such as the octopus camouflage, the crew, and the fact that as the Germans were increasingly running out of access to materials at the end of the war, they simply had to make compromises. Let me know what you think down in the comments, and if you like what I've built, then please consider hitting the like button and maybe even subscribing to my channel. My next build may have a bit of a desert feel, so be sure to catch it if you're a fan of building Tamiya kits. Until then, keep building models, support your local hobby shop, and share your work so others can also be inspired.